Welcoming to the show. We're doing another just independent dive, and we decided to go after a dark fantasy horror writer himself, Bill Hatfield. He's got his own book. He's coordinated with star of the movie MANOS, The Hands of Fate. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. So I take it you're a big Mystery Science Theater, drive-in theater kind of movie guy.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. This shows my age. I didn't grow up with the show. I actually discovered it through cracked.com. Jackie Newman Jones, who from the original movie, she did an article on there. It was called something like Five Things That I Learned as the Star of the Worst Movie Ever Made. And that was how I discovered not only Mouse the Hands of Fate, but also MST3K. And yeah, I've definitely gone down that rabbit hole in the years since.
Man, so that's quite a dive. Altogether, is there? How would you describe its kind of meta humor before that was such a thing that's kind of commonplace on gaming forums and the internet?
What I describe
Just the meta humor as Mystery Science Theater, mocking humor, spoofing humor.
riff tracks, these they're not necessarily making fun of these movies. In a lot of cases, they're really bringing out of the background into the forefront and giving them an audience that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
There's
And
that
while there are
too.
certainly some moments that are lampooned, they sometimes point out, good things about.
But yeah, this kind of humor just fascinates you because it's like you say, they're giving them a giant audience they otherwise wouldn't have, other than like retro video stores and drive-in theaters at that time.
That's right, especially in the case of Manos the Hands of Fate, because before it was on MST, it was really this obscure, unknown
Word of mouth.
movie that
Yeah.
it really didn't have an audience outside its premiere. And Jackie Neiman Jones described it in the book she wrote about it as her home movie. And then, of course, it was featured on MST, and it gained a cult following, and it
Yeah,
really is. I think it's had the most like sequels and other related media out of all the movies riffed on that show.
absolutely. I just got the remastered Blu-ray, and yeah, I've seen the sequels. We did a mono special. They're just because, like you say, I think this is a movie that, unlike some of the other infamous ones, people are fascinated by the concept and everything, and the incompetent parts are actually add to kind of the cult appeal. It's like, hey, they had a vision, they just didn't know how to execute it, but still.
Right. And I don't think that Manos is the worst movie of all time by any
Yeah.
respect. There are fields of movies way worse than that. I mean, there are several featured on MST that have just an incomprehensible plot. You just cannot understand where it's going. Whereas Manos, it has a plot. It doesn't always stick to it, but it has a
Hmm.
plot and it has an idea of where it's going. But
Exactly. Yeah.
you as the audience, one thing that keeps you invested in it is that you as the audience have no idea where it's going at any one moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It says a lot compared to various other movies that have had just whiny, unlikable protagonists, gross, or just very unconvincing special effects, or just like you say, just plots that are just head scratchers to where you keep losing interest each time you try to focus. And for all the other
Right.
movies that have just like feel like five different movies packed together, or have unconvincing stock footage, it's like this is not one that we can put into any of those categories.
Right. I'm a firm believer that if Manos had been made 10 years later by David Lynch, it would have been regarded as a surreal masterpiece.
That's true. Yeah, it is funny how people like to jump on bandwagons. Yeah, if we'll see all these other movies that are pissing people off and dividing audiences, but then uh it, you'll see so many other people are just like, oh, but if Jordan Peele or Christopher Nolan do it, it's okay.
Right. And I don't use the term Lynchian lightly, but you look at the movie and it's got the same awkward pauses and just uncharacteristic actions. And like I said, you never know where the script is headed. It really does feel Lynchian in aspects.
Yeah, that is a good point too. Because yeah, it's just who knows? He could have easily been watching all kinds of just bizarre '70s terror movies, whether it's Trilogy of Terror or just a infamous Twilight Zone episode. It's just uh, it's always fascinating to see just people try not just something different, uh, but also uh, just being ambitious.
Right. And Hal Warren was nothing if not ambitious.
Yeah, how could I call this not ambitious? I mean, it's it wants something from beginning to end.
Yeah, something.
We'll return after these messages.
If you like small town mystery, crazy news, and wild history, then the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast is for you. Each week, Josh Mills and Wayne McCarty bring you the absolute best Florida has to offer. So if you're looking for a show that's safe for the family, but funny enough to help you escape everyday life, then listen to the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast. That's Florida Men, plural, on Florida Man podcast.
Hey, it's Brent Pope, the host of Breakfast with Brent Pope. You've seen me on some of your favorite TV shows saying things like, "Give it up, Jimmy. You got to sink this putt to win." On Breakfast with Brent Pope, I sit down with guests from the entertainment world, and we do it all over breakfast. Or should I say Brentfast? Every week on Brentfast, you get inside Hollywood info and tips, great breakfast recs and booty debates. Most of all, you get the most delightful 30 minutes of your week. So dig in. It's Brentfast time. Listen at Brentfast.com, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are found.
The Jacked Up Review Show podcast is honored to be part of the Blind Knowledge Podcast Network. Join anytime, talk the talk, and enjoy yourselves. There's something enlightening for everyone with this crowd of cool cats. Check them out. Ever feel just any just there's plenty of people who are Manos fans, but they just haven't showed their face yet?
That's a good question because while I was writing the book, I got my fiance to watch the movie, and she watched it for the first time unriffed with no jokes or commentary over it. And it kept her attention throughout the whole thing. I mean, she did not regard it as a cinematic masterpiece, but she watched it, which I would say is an impressive feat on its own. So,
That says a lot.
I feel like, it's something that is curious and out there enough for anybody really to get into and at least dip their toe in. And, I feel like that's kind of a good starting point if you want to check out these so-called So Bad They're Good movies. Manos is a pretty good one to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the wacky elevator music, the various, do-it-yourself locations, and all other sorts of stuff is definitely something to applaud.
Oh, I have the soundtrack on vinyl.
Look at you go. There you go. And so you noted how you had some other stuff in progress, but what gave you the courage to just write a book of any sort, whether it was fan fiction or original concept? And do you have any original fiction coming out? Sorry,
Well,
that's a great question.
that's fine. I've always been a lover of literature and writing and English. I was always much more comfortable in English and math. And funny thing is, when I was a kid, I was a scaredy cat. I was scared of everything. I hated horror. And I had an older sister that loved horror movies. So she would put them in the VCR and just absolutely terrify me with them. But, now that we're both adults, the roles are reversed where I'm the horror fan and she's the scaredy cat.
It's
Um,
interesting. I was kind of on that same boat. I didn't really watch anything unless it was something kind of mainstream, like Wishmaster or Gremlins or even Temple of Doom. And then it got to where it's like, okay, well, now that there's finally some people who have a voice and actually know how to make a cool kind of subgenre movie, I'll give it a chance. Just as long as it's not just being unpleasant for the sake of unpleasant.
Right. But like I said, I always loved writing. It was something, I would just do in my spare time. I hardly ever showed anybody. And uh, the the genesis of the idea of novelizing Manos and reimagining it as a straight horror story, believe it or not, it actually kind of came to me when I went to go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in the theater. It was the scene where Brad Pitt's character goes to Spawn Ranch and things get real tense and spooky for a few minutes there. And an image just popped into my head of what if Torgo walked out of the trailer.
Oh, there you go. Give all these guys, all these demonic minions, just something extra to do.
Right. And then, of course, 2020 happened and all that came with it. And I was sitting at home with not a whole lot to do. And I really just started writing. Up to that point, I'd written some short stories and stuff, but I had never sat down and written a full-fledged novel. And I just had this kernel of an idea in my head, and I decided to just go for it. And I did. And it was amazing along the way. I was able to connect with Jackie Naaman Jones, and she was very kind in providing the forward. And I released the book completely independently, and it managed to get #1 on Amazon's horror list. So I'm pretty proud of that achievement.
That is awesome. And were you already like honored social media with you?
Yes.
Okay, stellar. Altogether, I mean, why do you think just this idea of wanting to do justice for this cult movie just sprung onto your head?
Well, like we talked about earlier, Manos, uh, despite being a very poorly executed movie, it does have a semblance of a plot, and that plot is actually very interesting. It's this couple or this family getting lost in the rural part of Texas and stumbling upon this wild cult, and by itself that's a really good idea for a horror story. And
Absolutely.
that was kind of my goal, is to just make it a straight horror story. And I'm not going to spoil the ending for anybody who hasn't read the book, but my book features a very different ending than the one in the movie. And the ending was actually something that I had planned in the beginning, because it was what I kind of wanted to work towards, because I felt that it really made a better sense of the whole thing. Not necessarily better, but for what I was going for, it made more sense than the ending that the movie has.
Yeah, that's good. You might as well do a director's cut if no one else is going to do that anytime soon. That's very cool. So, altogether, why do you think you just got the courage in general to just write? Had you always kind of been tempted to write, or did this come just later in life?
Well, I've definitely always been tempted to write. I mean, ever since kindergarten, I was a writer. There's actually a newspaper clipping I've got somewhere in here of me as a kindergartner with a little 3-page story that I wrote that they had put in the newspaper for whatever reason. And so that was always a part of me. And I think one thing that, as I grew older, drew me more to horror and thriller was the idea of taking the audience on a roller coaster ride, giving them twists and turns and not letting them be able to guess where the story is headed next. And right. And the thing as I was growing up and leaned more into horror and mystery was the idea of taking the audience on sort of a roller coaster ride with twists and turns and not be able to guess where it was going to go. And especially because I mostly grew up with my grandparents, and they tended to keep the TV on the oldies channel. And on the weekends, they would show a lot of Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, and I absolutely adored those, especially the ones with the twist endings. One of the first, I think, the first Twilight Zone that I ever watched was the one where the old lady finds the miniature aliens in her house and has to fight them off. And I was just amazed at how they were able to tell such a complete story with no dialogue.
What do you have coming up that you would like to promote?
Well, currently I'm working on a book of short stories. I wanted to have it out this summer, but in between having a day job and getting married in 6 weeks, I've been kind of
Congrats.
busy. So it's not gone along quite. Thank you. It's not gone along quite as quickly as I wanted to, but I'm working very hard towards finishing it and hopefully have it out soon, though don't have a release date just yet. It's short stories. Kind of, I tried to explore different horror subgenres.
Much like
There's
Twilight
the
Zone, you
classic
like
haunted
anthologies.
house. There's werewolves.
Much like anthologies, you
Exactly. I do love anthologies.
All right, cool.
And exactly. And there's one story where there is a killer at a campground who is legally distinct from Jason Voorhees. And I thought it would be fun to explore him going through a midlife crisis and wonder if killing is still worth it.
Nice. Very cool. All together, what gets you up in the morning, and what advice would you have for anyone else who wants to do their own do-it-yourself self-publishing books? What tools should they use?
What gets me up in the morning? Espresso.
Nice.
As far as what advice I would give, I mean, look at Manos, The Hands of Fate. It was a completely independent production made by a bunch of local theater actors who had never acted in a film. It was made by this guy who had no idea how to make a movie, but he said, you know what, I want to, so we're going to go out and do it anyway.
Sweet.
And the results, you can argue, have as far exceeded even the director's expectations, although may not in the way that he had hoped. And honestly, it was kind of the same for me. I just decided one day, you know what? I don't care if I don't have any big contacts. I don't care if I'm not a big name. I'm just going to write this book and put it out there. And I put it out completely independently, and it sold and it went to #1. So, you never know how something is going to go until you do it. Sometimes even if it's something that you're afraid that you're going to fail at, you never know if you're going to fail until you try.
There you go. Just love it. Uh, anything else you do in your free time outside of writing and day job?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to read a lot more than I used to. I'm actually reading. Well, actually, I'm listening because it's an audiobook. I'm listening to Questlove Music is History, where each chapter he assigns a different song to each year. It's really interesting. And, I try to, go way outside, the genre I write in and read from all different venues. And I try to watch, as many different movies, good and bad. Life is short, and I want to have as much, knowledge and culture in me as I can.
Sweet. Okay, well, it's been great chatting with you, and everyone else, check out the book. You can get it on Amazon. Anywhere else you can get it? Like, is there a hardcover or?
Just Amazon at the moment. I'm hoping when the second book comes out, it'll get expanded to a few other markets. My social media, wherever you do your socials, it's at B Hatfield Author, and you can find me under that in Instagram, on Threads. I think I still have a Twitter, but ever since they switched to the X thing, it's kind of gone kablooey, and I'm having trouble logging on. So who knows?
I hear you.
And I'm
It's a
on
mess.
Facebook under my name, Bill Hatfield. So there you go.
Okay, well, thanks for joining in the fun, and glad we got to pick your brain on just do it yourself mentality. Before we also go, I take it you also are into music. Is there any music you'd like to promote?
None of mine that I would like to promote. I kind of quit doing music a few years ago. It's still something I love, though.
All right.
You know, when I did play, I was kind of a blues and folk guy. I loved the old timey blues and folk, the Robert Johnson, the Blind Willie Johnson, all of those old guys. In fact, one of the stories in my short story collection, it's actually about a blues man who sells his soul to the devil. So even when I'm not playing music, it always manages to creep its way into whatever I'm doing.
Very cool. Okay, well, you be safe out there and keep trucking along.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening. It's a jacked up